Hello and welcome to another Teletext People from Byte High No Limit. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for their support and kind feedback they have sent me over these past few years. The kind words, follow-up information and ideas for new episodes have made this series such a pleasure to make. I've made new friends and I've discovered many new projects that have taken me and sometimes you, the listener, onto new avenues of interest to peruse. I have also received some support via Ko-fi, which has helped me to offset the cost of hosting the podcast. The support is much appreciated. However, I would not recommend a rolling donation, as I don't think this is providing the donor a good value for money, as my output these days is less than regular than what it should be. But I do have plans for new episodes, more of which you will find out when I make them. The Teletext People episodes are not only about the history, but about the community that is still around today to keep the technology alive and accessible for those who are still curious about it. With that, here is Chris Bell, who has news about Superpage 58 and something that we can all help with.
Hello, Chris Bell here, the little guy that does Superpage 58, the digitiser archive and tribute site. Thanks to Carl for giving me a moment to talk to you. I've been running the site for nearly 28 years now, since the days when digitiser was still being broadcast on Teletext, and for the last 6 of them, I've been archiving actual Teletext pages of Digi, thanks to the miracle of Teletext recovery from videotapes. In that time, the community has found so much that around 65% of the editions that went out now have a home on the site, nearly 2,000 editions. The flip side of that amazing progress is that as the remaining pool shrinks, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to locate unfound editions, and there's still plenty of significant material left on our hit list. Batches of new finds are slowing down. It'll take more than the odd car boot sale find or personal cache of old tapes to maintain the rate of progress we've enjoyed up to now. But I have good news on that front. I was recently offered a collection of around 2,000 VHS tapes, all with off-air recordings, many of which span the crucial 1993 to 2003 era when Digi was on air, the contents of which have been meticulously labelled by the original owner. Now, the bad news is that I'm not a Teletext recoverer myself. I'm merely in debt to them for the work they do. I also have nowhere near enough space to store 2,000 old videotapes at home. And this is where you can help me. I couldn't bear the prospect of such a potential treasure trove of unrecovered digitiser being lost to landfill or broken up and the teletext not released. So, I've made the decision to hire a self-storage unit. The tapes are safely locked away there now, but they're currently just sitting there. The unit isn't cheap, and I can't sit on them forever. So, if you're one of the growing number of Teletext recovery heroes out there, if you're in need of tapes and would be happy for me to send you a box of them, then please do get in touch. You can find me on Blue Sky at superpage58.bsky.social, or you can fire off an email to superpage58@gmail.com. This whole ridiculous endeavour only really works if there are fine upstanding members of the Teletext community who are willing to take some of the tapes for recovery purposes. Also, as I said, the outlay for the unit is not insignificant. I'm paying around £70 a month for the pleasure. So if you're feeling kind and would like to very generously donate towards the storage fees, then you would be very welcome, and I would be very grateful. Stupidly, embarrassingly grateful. If that sounds like you, then you can put a £5 in the jar at coffee.com/superpage58. Or if you feel like giving a little more than that, well, all contributions are welcome. Just message me and we can work something out. All my contact details are on superpage58.com if you need them. And finally, you might be wondering why this matters when we already have so much Digi recovered in the archive. Well, while we've managed to find many of the important moments from its life, there are still quite a few more key ones out there waiting for us to track down. Moments like the infamous review of Sonic 3 that unleashed hell when they dared to give it 72%. The April Fool edition when they reviewed a fake, super gory Mortal Kombat style Mario beat-em-up. The 1996 Christmas Panto. Mag Monkey, the weekend feature where Digi inexplicably decided to review an issue of CBG at the height of the war of words with best-selling games mag publisher EMAP. The Games Master live chat subtitles. The Gossie the Dog story that got Mr. Hares fired for accurately reporting that Dave Perry had received a dressing down from his publisher. And, purely for my own amusement, the man's daddy joke about why you always think about skinheads in the bath. It's because skinheads are looking in the window. Frankly, no digitiser archive worth the name would be complete without them, and we can find them. Maybe we already have them, hidden inside those many tapes. It would be a massive boost to the cause and a real gift if you could help me find out, and thrust us closer towards completing this possibly foolhardy mission. Do you see?
Thanks to Chris Bell, and I'm sure that some of you out there will be able to help with the cause. My reintroduction to Teletext was first roused by Chris's Superpage 58 site, and if you have not seen it for yourself, I would urge you to go and visit it on superpage58.com. If any listeners want to record something that will be of interest to the Teletext community, you can reach out to me on Blue Sky, Facebook the Teletext group, or Discord, and I'll be happy to include it on a future show. The main feature today is a real treat and is a recording from a panel from the Teletext 50 Festival from September 2024 at the Centre of Computing History in Cambridge. The two gentlemen that you are going to hear from were guests and kindly agreed to provide us with an impromptu panel on the Sunday morning. The panel was somewhat of an exclusive, and luckily for us all, Jason Robertson, the Teletext archaeologist, was on hand to record the majority of the panel for posterity by leaving his phone on voice record and placing it next to a speaker. The first 30 seconds or so is David Reyes speaking to Jason directly just before the panel started in the foyer of the centre. I included it because it provided some context to David's role. David was the principal R&D engineer at BBC Research at his time at Kingsford Warren. His remit included Ceefax, telesoftware and data broadcasting. The next gentleman we are introduced to is Charles Hope, who works at BBC R&D at Television Centre, Lime Grove and Henry Wood House, working in the field of standards conversion in Ceefax, as well as marketing the technology to other broadcasters. More of this you will hear later on. Charles also worked on many newsworthy events: the 1966 World Cup, the Olympics in Mexico, the Winter Olympics in Grenoble, and also the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The accounts from David and Charles provides a great complement to the recollections of John Adams, who I recently interviewed. His story is already available. Just look back for John Adams in my podcast feeds. If you want to see other panels that were hosted that weekend, then you should visit Jamie Nemeth's YouTube page, where he has provided the recordings. I would urge anyone who has not yet visited that site to go and take a look, as there are many contributors who have never shared their experiences of Teletext and Ceefax before in that context, and will probably not have the opportunity to do so again for many years. So thanks again for Jason's quick thinking on this. We join the panel, and apologies in advance for the varying sound quality, but on with the episode.
Sorry, so when you started in the early 80s?
I think I joined the BBC, I think it was 79. You go through some training, so you go to different sections, and they give you 6 months of each section. Then I joined what was called Special Systems, Special Projects, which encompass the Teletext portfolio.
Is this at Kingsford Warren?
Yes. It was run by the section head, was John Chambers, who was the main guy responsible for pushing the standard and coordinating the standard, along with UK government and the IBA. Somebody from IBA. People like mentioned this morning would be contributing occasionally, like people like John Hedger. Somebody from Philips might be there because Philips were interested in the decoding side. That would be probably Graham Sharpless. They occasionally had people from Mullard, Mullard was a subsidiary of Philips that made semiconductors. So they would have representatives, and the people I can remember is John Kinghorn. So there was this group of people that all knew each other, that regularly attended once every few months, whatever, meetings to discuss Teletext and next generations, and that would be fed by demos from the individual labs who would say, here's a good idea, do you think this is a good idea? And they would say yes or no, and it would be then potentially put into the committees. So I was, after it was all fixed, so the bit I saw was extensions to Teletext version 1. So I would have seen what we call FLOF, full level 1 features, which is level 1 enhancements. I think we had something called level 1.5. These definitions, I think, have become vague because the people who decided them didn't define them. So over the years, they've changed their definitions. During my period, it was level one enhancements, level 2, which is probably similar to what everybody understands. Level 3 was redefinable character sets. Level 4 was graphics primitives, and level 5 was picture teletext. Some of those developments are just, wouldn't it be nice if, because there was frankly no way we were going to throw away existing KTeX decoders, which remain Philips and Texas Instruments, in a compatible way, and replace it with some graphic primitive system. It's a backward compatibility problem. You can't undo what's out there. And the goal was to get information to people, not to just make fancier and fancier technology. So the work was split up by the Department of Trade and Industry for IBA, the ITV companies, to do the level 4 stuff for really at this stage for demonstration purposes, and it was given to the BBC to do the level 5 stuff. So that's what I did. I did the demonstrations of picture teletext, not because it was a viable service, because it never was, because you need extra bandwidth, and you need changes in technology, and you need kind of heavy processing computers and TV sets to do the thing of the day. But we were trying to promote it against competing systems from around the world, notably NABTS, North American Teletext, Teledon, which was a Canadian system, Antioch, which was a French system, and the idea was to promote the Teletext around the world to get sales of UK-based, in this case Philips, Muller, decoders and TV sets. And largely that succeeded because most of Europe has adopted the gloriously called World System Teletext, because marketed it was basically the Ceefax Oracle that we knew. They call it World System Teletext because that sounded better in the international market. So that went into most of Europe. Most of Europe has had teletext similar to us, the same kind of period. Any of the 625 line countries, so that would be Australia, some of the Far East. America is slightly different because it requires 525 and there's changes in specification to do it. And Mort can talk more about that because we had. You can't just use the same decoders. You have to get. It's kind of there's a technology barrier about making new decoders for the North American market. So you can't just import what we had into North America without a amount of hassle. But it can be done, but there's a hill to climb. And so we contributed to that. We contributed to demonstrations in various places. Like I remember doing demonstrations. I remember doing the work for the demonstrations they did in Chicago for Mort's work. I remember doing demonstrations in Montreux because at the time they had an annual Montreux festival where they all the broadcast companies came together. A very nice place, Montreux, for a week, whatever. Especially if they sent us out a few days before to set it up, and put us up in a nice hotel. So we did demonstrations there in the EBU new technology area to promote all this, and so interestingly enough, the BBC and IBA and ITV got involved with more than just promoting what the BBC was using. This was really a collaborative thing between a number of groups of people that got on together, knew each other. We were competitive in the services, but not competitive in the actually, it's all to everybody's advantage to get a standard agreed system where everybody's TV set behaves the same way and you know what it is. That is always the difficulty with broadcasting. You need everybody to be on the same page, otherwise everybody's doing their own thing. And you can't make a service where only half the sets can receive it. But you can, but you've lost half your audience. But I'll
would it be sort of like in about 75 when the IBA and the BBC decided to agree on the world standard teletext?
It must have been because the reference document that we all used was dated 76.
Right, yes, okay.
I've dug out some documents today which I haven't seen for years. We found one dated 71. I don't know if it's Providence.
Yeah, I've managed to fetch some really old teletext from 1975, and that's a different standard from the 1976 version. So it was evolving all the time. So the graphics codes are different, for example, in earlier teletext. So it became a standard in September 1976, and but yeah, it was a lot of changes before then.
Afterwards, either you have a look or I'll photocopy a copy of the 71 document. So I haven't looked at it. I don't know why it was there, and I have it. It's dated 71, and we'll compare them and see how it's changed.
I mean, I'd love to see that. I mean, what I don't have is the earliest data I've got is 1975. I've got some screenshots of an even earlier service, which isn't 40 characters long, so it's even before that. But that's before your time there, isn't it?
I suspect that the variation was the UK had a spec, and we wanted it to get agreed within the European Broadcasting Union, and that was possibly only minor changes, but the UK spec then became the European spec, and that probably accounts for the two different versions at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's the sort of original version of teletext is very sort of Anglo-centric. It's just the English characters and that's it. There's no foreign letters on, accents, letters with hats on. There's none of that. So, but there's a special section of characters which can be different for different countries, and set by flags in the header. Yeah.
What I got involved with was mainly showing off the whole concept of teletext to what was thought to be important people. Party conferences, and the first one I got sent to at about 2 days' notice because my colleague who was going to have gone there suddenly wasn't able to drive anymore. He was diagnosed with diabetes and he lost his motor insurance. So I got sent at 0 notice to Liberal Party conference in Scarborough. Now, when the bigger parties take over places of party conferences, they have them all day. But the Liberals had very little money, and so they only had use of the Winter Gardens, which I think it was called, for the daytime. Everything had to be cleared out overnight, so someone else could use it in the evening. And having got this experimental kit which I'd taken there to show off Ceefax, I decided that I didn't want to leave it in the car just parked overnight, so the hotel I was staying at had lock-up garages, and I thought it was very sensible to put the car in one of those overnight. And when I came to pay my bill, the hotel had just gone over to a computerized accounting system, and you pushed a button and it said what you owed people, but they didn't have one for lock-up garages. So I had slight difficulty when getting back to the office, trying to account for my expenses, that I had hairdresser every night. I mean, you've got to make fun of these things, because if you don't, it becomes terribly sad. Montreux was mentioned. At about 2 days' notice, which was slightly more, I got sent to show off Ceefax at Montreux quite early on. It had been... Someone had discovered that IPA was showing off Oracle there. The BBC couldn't be behindhand, and they had to go as well. And we ended up on the corner of GEC's stand, because GEC was just making the first commercial receiver for teletext. It was an add-on box under one of their 19-inch sets, making the but it was supposedly a commercial set, full of TTL chips, because none of the dedicated chips had existed. And I drove over to Switzerland. I mean, how else do you get there with a sorted kit? And of course, when you get to foreign customs posts, you have to identify stuff on temporary import, which I did all the time. And then I got told I had to pay, I think 10 francs 70, I think was the amount. And we were going back to the early 70s, so quite a bit of money. And I thought, it's all right, I'll get a receipt, which I did. And it was 10 francs for the time and work and processing of the carnet, and 70 centimes for the use of the form I had to fill. Yes. Only the Swiss.
Was that more hairdressers on that?
No, it wasn't hairdressers. It was just the fact that the Swiss made foreigners pay for their government forms rather than giving free. And of course, the only other one, which was a very great boost to the Ceefax system, was a demonstration at the TUC in Brighton, similar sort of time period. And one of the things you had to do with the receiver when you turned it on in the morning, make sure the subtitle facility was working, because that was one of the selling points of Ceefax, so you could put subtitles onto your normal programs. And I switched it on, and there's a news flash there. Beijing Radio have just announced Mao Zedong has died. Now, 2 tables away from me were 3 or 4 people from the Chinese New People's Daily who were covering the thing. So I managed to persuade them to come and look at the caption, which one of them did. They went and chatted to each other in Chinese for a few minutes, and then all vanished for the rest of the day. I think they went back to London to find out what the embassy was doing. But it promoted the fact that Ceefax was up to date with the news, and that's what they liked about it. And I suspect it was helped to sell Ceefax in that part of the world. I think it's completely wrong, but you never know.
Yeah. I mean, talking about China and well, Europe, everywhere. I mean, was there like? It sounds to me like the interest in taking a technology that went over the TV signal was taken up by every country, or every country did express an interest.
France had their own system. Yes. But the whole, they were trying to make it take over from telephone directories, believe it or not. You wouldn't have to have this great pile of books for your telephone directory. If anyone can remember what those were. You'd simply type in the name of the person on the television screen and it would come up. That was what they invented it for. A similar system appeared in the States. You could download newspapers overnight, but that didn't go down terribly well. People objected to spending their own money printing out adverts.
Fax machines. It raises a question about how you decide where to jump in with technology, because first of all, challenge to you, I think Teletext was the first thing that was digital in people's homes. I can't think of anything else. I'll say that. Maybe remote controls, but they're kind of quasi-analog. I can't think of anything else, so this is the first thing. And there is, I'm not sure there's a choice, because you have to just get on with what's there, but you can always say, well, if I wait a few years, there'll be a faster processor or more memory or whatever it is, therefore I can do a better job. And arguably Antioch was better technically because it could do fancier graphics, and it was, but the result of that, it was more expensive and you needed more resources, and therefore it was less economic. So Teletext was designed in the days when there were no computers. Well, I might be exaggerating, there were computers, but they're not serious for the consumer. And the first Teletext decoders were entirely logic TTL, not TTL.
Yes, they were TTL.
Well, some of them were, but they're based on logic designs with flip-flops and counters which go along the line, 40 characters, each character looks up in a ROM, this is this shape and this colour, and it does it like this. So there is no computing in the original Teletext chipset at all. And then you do a transition between that and actually we really quite like to have more memory. So Philips had this thing called CCT, Computer Controlled Teletext, which was really a decoder that had, I think it was 4K. I think 4K by modern standards is, well.
It's an eyelash.
But that could store 4 pages, and therefore you could start caching pages. So if you were lucky, when you went to the next page in a group or adjacent page, it would be available immediately. So you got the perception that the service was faster than it actually was. So you could start thinking about using technology to do better things. And I remember my boss, John Chambers, and a guy from Ireland, Barry O'Halloran, and somebody from the EBU, and I can't remember who else, going around and trying to persuade the manufacturers that 4K memory or more, 8K or 16K, was the right thing to do because everybody would benefit from it. But at that time, the manufacturers say, 4K, that costs an extra 2 cents or whatever it is. No way. There was a great reluctance, and so there's always a tension between doing better technology with fancier, more powerful things, and doing it the absolute cheapest way. And one of the reasons why Teletext took off was nothing to do with the technology at all. It's to do with, at the time, people leased TV sets. You went to radios and rented TV sets. And the government did some kind of deal where if you rented a TV set with Teletext in, you got, I don't know what, they got a discount or it was cheaper. There was some reason to encourage people to rent TV sets. So that's why it took off at those times. So it wasn't people inventing better graphics or fancier technology. It was to do with somebody understanding the marketing and the commercial world, saying that, give people a good deal and they'll go for it. That's what they did. And there's another thing slightly sideways, but it's to do with the enhanced technology of the 4-page system. Because we knew that extra pages were coming, in the labs we were doing the work with the how we would exploit the 4 pages, or more than 4 pages. And that's where the linked pages came in. So we've heard earlier that you can have lines in the system that aren't seen by TV sets. Well, they're seen by the decoders, but they're not displaying stuff on the screen. And one of the lines was used for what we call linked pages. So there's space for more than 4, but there's space for a pointer to extra pages. So you could predict you could predict which pages were the most likely, and you could tell, and the transmission would tell the decoders which ones to grab. So if you knew that most people went to page 100 because they took the beginning, then they went to news headlines, you could tell it, well, if you get news headlines on 101, your chances are you're going to get earlier access to it. So now that resulted in someone, the first time I saw it was someone from the university, come up with the coloured buttons, because they labelled each of these 4 links with a coloured button. I'm saying it wasn't invented by us, it was invented by someone in one of these demos from a university. I'd love to know who it was or which university it was. Anyway, we looked at it and said, that's a good idea. So we implemented it in the lab because we had a test earlier, saying this is a good thing, let's go this way. So the coloured buttons got put into the specification, And if you think about the legacy of Teletext, one of the legacies of Teletext is that virtually every remote control sold today has 4 coloured buttons. And that came from Teletext.
And that's worldwide, isn't it?
That's worldwide.
Yeah.
So if you want, Teletext to spread its tentacles throughout the world, it has done it. One way it's done it is by promoting the idea that people should have a separate way of navigating beyond the typing in a few numbers.
I think nowadays, in the World Wide Web, we have hyperlinks, and fast text is basically teletext hyperlinks.
Same concept, absolutely same concept.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, going back to the government involvement that you talked about, I think it's October 1981, they had National Teletext Month, which is sort of like a big sort of industry push to get more teletext out there. So that's probably around that time, I would guess.
Yes, that's very. I would have been active doing teletext research projects then. I didn't get involved in that month, but that's a advertising campaign, if you like.
I thought it was 82.
So it might be
September 28th, 87.
They had a couple. They had a couple of pushes. Can I ask about your involvement with enhanced teletext? Now, you mentioned there that IBA were to look at level 4, which was used what we call alpha geometrics, which is basically draw a line, draw a circle, etc. So that's how that worked. So you would have high resolution graphics generated by a sort of a draw and a fill, a bit like you would do things in a computer in the 80s. And the IBA did that piece, but BBC, and that was level 4, but BBC looked after level 5, which was a teletext, photo teletext. So a number of years ago, I recovered a Betamax videotape, and that had those data on it. So I could see I could see the text, and it had a description of what the picture was. It had a picture of the voyage of the moons of Jupiter, I think it was, or Saturn, I think, from Voyager, and I've been trying to sort of decode these data ever since. So, I mean, I know you said you were involved in that yesterday. I wonder if you could tell us the story of how that came about and any more technical details you can remember.
Right, we had. This isn't going to end well, this story. In our lab we had our own modular computer system, which we call Eric for some reason, I don't know why, which we used for various things. It had a picture store, a graphics memory, which could display certain images. So we used that for teletext research. We built in those days, a rack that's, ordinarily a 19-inch rack for research purposes. Never used for the standard services, but we would use it. We'd occasionally take it up to television centre to insert demonstration material, because you never want to mix the real transmission system with a demo system, because it's not going to compromise a real service. First thing you learn is that if you were to pull down the real running service in the BBC, you'd get your finger slapped and you wouldn't like.
Why didn't we give them your cards?
Yeah. So you do not take risks with the real live service, but you can do experiments. And in the teletext it's quite easy because you can have your own line to do it. You can just have a separate inserter, and it's not going to mess around unless you're really silly and compete in the addressing. So we had this internal system which we used to have in the lab, and we could program it to do what we liked and do the link pages we did, and we did. We never did the graphic system because that's what was IBA's job. So that I programmed that to do this particular teletext, and it was pretty basic, and it wasn't practical, because if you're doing serious picture teletext, you spend an awful lot of time coding those pictures, equivalent of JPEG or whatever, and then you start proposing formats to set the sizes of them and whether you can have transparency and all sorts of things, and you spend an awful lot of time. But we never viewed it as this is what we're going to do, or even put in a specification. It was more proof of principle, because we were, if you remember what I told you earlier, we were actually trying to compete with Teletext, which was a graphics primitive system which just launched. And they were saying things like, oh, this old Teletext system is based on hardware, therefore don't have theirs, have this fancier system that does all these fancy graphics. And so the DTI wanted something which would refute their claims. So can it do it? Well, yes, Teletext VBI system can do it. Clearly, 40 by 23, 24 pages can't do it. But the system as a whole, of a transmission system that transmits bits that can be then interpreted by a computer, can do it, and therefore we could do it if it was economic and sensible. And so you might look ahead a few years, it may or may not come to pass. So we never viewed it as this is something we will propose. Therefore, it was never documented, and it was never put in front of committees. And so bad news of this is that you will not find a document which describes what's in those bits.
Were they coloured pictures?
Yes.
Right, that tells me something. Okay, that's great. I suppose it did actually get there in the end, because on the BBC Red button now there are pictures, but now of course that's entirely different technology. Yeah,
so the BBC Red button is exactly similar principle of transmitting data along with a digital, with a TV picture, although that is now dying out, of course, and using that to display pages of text, stroke graphics, stroke pictures. So the principle is exactly the same. It's absolutely converted to digital, but the technology and the standards and the software and the APIs and they're all totally different.
Yeah. It doesn't have the charm of Teletext, I don't think. It doesn't have its blockiness and its bright colours. It kind of misses something there, I think. But yeah.
All right. A question to both of you again. Maybe Charles may be able to help with this. We sort of take for granted that the DTI, now Ofcom or whoever, were driving this from the government and subsidising rental sets, as you mentioned. I want to get inside the thinking of the government in the early 70s. What were their motives for squirting technology into people's homes?
I think the original reason was to promote British industry and promote sales of UK products abroad. Unfortunately, somewhere down the line, that got a bit confused, shall we say, and when a certain Mr. Gates was welcomed into Downing Street, it all sort of went rather sad.
I see, yeah. So you'd say before Mr. Gates' visit, then you'd say that I'm aware of the computer literacy project, and thanks to that.
Came with the BBC Micro. Mm-hmm. The BBC Micro, part of the founding concept was that you should have a teletext adapter. It wasn't just that it should be a home computer, but it would be a home computer with the teletext adapter. Now, unfortunately, down the road, they were having awful trouble making their teletext adapter work. This was before it was on the market. And guess what? I was sent to try and sort them out. And I did, purely by chance. My colleagues at Research Development had made a complete mess of it. It was actually, as far as I was concerned, looking at the project from a completely different direction, solved the problem. But yes, it was part of the BBC Micro project to have a teletext adapter And then, of course, you could be able to download programs, not just get teletext, but later on download software, which, particularly for schools, was very important. But on the other hand, as far as I was concerned, I got £25 for a program I wrote, an entertainment program. So this, it was a great thing. The adapter with the use of the computer.
So you had some telesoftware published on Ceefax.
I did have a piece of telesoftware published on Ceefax.
I need to find that, Charles. Because Charles here.
Yes, I don't know where it went. It was at one point on a 5.25-inch disc, which I never. I've lost the ability to read, even if I can still find it. The disc. So I know what the program was called, but.
What was it called?
Oh, I forgot.
Because
Battleships,
right? Because the telesoftware we can recover from videotape. So if mine already.
Battleships has a silly situation, and actually, I got triggered on the memory a couple of nights ago. But my young daughter came home from primary school, saying, "Claire's daddy's computer can play Battleships. Why can't ours?" We had a BBC Micro. Well, 3 days later, ours could play Battleships. I then subsequently discovered that Claire's daddy worked for IBM. But a few years later, my program appeared on telesoftware.
Just to take a bit of a diversion, because I always used to, as a child, I used to read the engineering information pages on 195,
yes.
And Charles here was always on that page, going around and visiting dealers.
Yep.
So it's
all
like
over the country. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like I'm meeting the heroes to this.
Yeah. Well, in the 70s and 80s, to expand television coverage on UHF, the BBC was building 70 transmitters a year, which was quite a sizable number. And my colleagues in the research department who planned them hadn't got the effort to go checking them out afterwards. So my department took upon itself to do the checking. So we went all over the UK and a few places beyond, like Jersey. One year I was in July in Shetland, when I discovered pioneer invented Shetland jumpers, and down to Jersey the following January, where they had their first snowfall for 50 or 60 years and didn't know what to do with it. But yes, we went all over the country, meeting individuals, local authorities, MPs, and dealers, and hopefully spread the word.
I think your travel expenses, Charles, must have been quite something.
Well, that's what we were there for.
Yeah.
We had a fixed limit. I mean, we did have survey vehicles. They were Range Rovers with about 3/4 of a ton of installed kit, which mainly came from our colleagues at the research department. So they were quite heavy, and they did certainly gobbled up fuel.
I think I've got to defend ourselves about the BBC Micro.
Yeah, go for it.
Charles is right. The BBC Micro was generated for the Computer Literacy Project, and that, I think, even again being pushed by government initiative. Clearly, the BBC went for it. Like, the BBC was in a position to coordinate education about computer technology, because it was up and coming and they wanted to get schools up to speed. And I have to say, one of the most successful things that I've seen. But that there's stories, there's even films made of it about how it came about and why it was Acorn and not Sinclair.
I've seen the letter that Clive Sinclair wrote.
All that stuff.
Yes.
That's the film Micro Men, isn't it? It's a good film, that.
And it's a fascinating story, but I didn't get involved with BBC Micro. I got involved with telesoftware and Teletext adapter, because Teletext adapter had to have the ability to receive Teletext, which it does. That was easy for them because it's a chip, and you buy the chip and it does it. And so you could argue one reason why they kept the basic mode 7, is it?
Yeah, mode 7,
that does teletext, because they knew they had to support teletext. But they also had the ULA, whatever it's called, the graphics chip, which was a pain, but it eventually it kind of made micro stand out. And so we had the task of getting telesoftware to work. I didn't have anything to do with the hardware, so
that's where I.
If it was a hardware problem,
I think it was a hardware problem.
I will not claim any.
No, it was a hardware problem, quite definitely.
I did have a fair amount to do with software because you needed a standard to do it. And we said, well, how are we going to transmit this software, which is, so arguably kind of 8-bit data down teletext, which is actually 8-bit, it's 7-bit plus parity in normal use, in a way which is not confusing the public, but in a way which actually can be partially read if you wish. And so there's a guy that worked for Acorn, I think it was Chris Oswald or somebody, who proposed a protocol to do it called redefinable telesoftware format, which I have to say was very clever, but it was never used in the most clever way. But it allowed you to send a string of data, and if you identified some string that was common and repeated, which in computer languages is quite often, you could shrink that by replacing it with a shrunk code. So that would allow you to compress BBC Basic, or any language to be honest, into something that was smaller and therefore more suitable for teletext. So he came up with this idea and said, that's fine, yeah, we'll go with that. So the format that we used was something invented by this Acorn employee that we bought into, and because a lot of the code is readable, it says go to stuff, you can read it. You can put that on pages which people can read or decode by hand if they wanted to, or that could be a bit of a pain. If it was shrunk with codes, they'd find it harder. But if we wanted to, we could put it on pages which you couldn't see, because you could just put an address which wasn't decoded. So the software service as a whole was put on 700s. In normal way, so you put the thing in cycles, and the specification we took back to Acorns, it has to be able to take in cycles, and if the page was wrong on the first time, you use the second time to correct it, exactly the same as we're doing with your reconstruction. And so we try and persuade them to do all this, which they did, and it works. I mean, I don't think any service that is one-to-many with no feedback loop is going to have some errors, but okay, it's fine. It was used by schools, and so we got that into there. I remember we had to talk about this place, it's bringing back loads of memories. I remember coming up to Cambridge a few times and going to the offices in Cambridge and then going to Cherry Hinton or wherever they were. And Herman Hauser used to come to us. It was Herman Hauser who was running the liaison with us. And we'd sit down in boring meetings and talk about what we're going to do with teletext. And so he was brought into the teletext system about this would be part of the offering that Acorn were making to the BBC to provide this. This was after it was agreed to be Acorn. It wasn't part of the Ceefax debate because we weren't part of that. Although I do know people that were. So I have to say Acorn supported and did that project properly and well. And we ended up with a teletext adapter which was used by a fair number of schools. It wasn't the most important service in the world, but it was part of the education system that got people used to software, got people used to data communications. Actually, it does something which people don't think about, which is if you have a system that somebody invents, and somebody then decides they want to make it exclusive, they can patent it. But what you can't patent is something that has prior use. If you can show that it's been previously used, you can't suddenly go around and patent it. because you say it's got prior knowledge. So the act of us transmitting software over broadcast channels probably contributed to stopping other people patenting that kind of technology. And there's a lot of that goes on. If you want to stop people getting monopolies, you do something and publish it which stops other people later on claiming rights over it, and therefore knocking other people out of the business, because they might have invented themselves completely independently, but they still will be stopped by the patent process because somebody owns it. So the earlier you do this, the better it is. So us doing teletext, data broadcasting, telesoftware, probably cleared the idea that people could claim rights to it, which there were legal cases about BBC claiming other people claiming patents over the teletext system. They were knocked out in court, usually they're knocked out by right at the court steps and somebody saying, coming to some agreement saying, this isn't going to run, is it? And they agree, oh yes, and they don't take it in front of the judge. But it's really quite important way that engineers tend to kind of ignore. They don't want to know about lawyers. But it is important because it means that you can have a complete competitive system based on the quality of technical products, rather than somebody happens to have done it first and got a piece of paper which says nobody else can do it.
So your role in telesoftware, was that to write the software on the server side, the teletext side,
I didn't write. I wrote code to do teletext demonstrations, but I never wrote any telesoftware. What I would do is go to Logica, who provided the transmission system, and say, we need something to do that. And telesoftware is not that hard to add to pages. It's just, here's some pages, in a running telesoftware system. Just pretend to be a terminal and upload them. There's a number of sub-pages that one so I didn't do that.
I mean, although we had like the wedge adapter for the which everyone remembers as a teletext adapter, there's another one later on, the advanced teletext adapter, and later on in telesoftware's history it even started supporting the IBM PC, just before it closed down in 89, or was it a bit earlier than that? So telesoftware had a good run of about 10 years, and it ended up supporting the IBM PC. I've also recovered some Italian teletexts with telesoftware in it, so it's been doing the rounds, shall we say.
Telesoftware was originally proposed not by the BBC, but by the more active were the IBA or something. Just trying to think of his guy's name. But they did experiments probably in advance of the BBC. They got it faster, and they broadcast over radio channels, because you just like a modem, and they expected people to press a cassette.
Yeah.
I mean, they experiment. I mean, to be fair, but they were. Let's have a go at this, innovative, rather than just saying, "Oh, it's a good idea. Let's not do anything." They had a go, and they were looking into. So I would say they were earlier in that innovation than the BBC were.
Mm. I mean, the telesoftware goes back to the late 70s. There's telesoftware there for what's it called, the ABC, the Signetics machines, I think it is. I forgot what I was going to say. I mean, the other, you mentioned that over-the-air broadcast with their sort of tape tones. There was also broadcast a sort of a flashing dot on a TV program, and you're supposed to use a sort of a light detecting resistor to sort of measure the signal coming off that, but I'm not sure that was anything like a success story?
No, I don't know anything about it.
I seem to remember something like that being shown on Tomorrow's World.
Yes.
And I was in the background of the studio when they showed it, and it was a very much a piece of hardware that was not really able to cope. And there were, one was thinking, is it actually going to work at the time we come to show? It did, thankfully, but it was very susceptible to changing picture content.
Was that an optical system?
That was I've seen that as an Easter egg on the IT Crowd.
Yeah, it was a very odd system, but I can remember saying
It's light flash and it uses light. I'm thinking
no,
about
I don't
optical.
know that. I think it interpreted things in the program and either could even censor if there were, you could even censor programs if you put the right data stream out. Scenes of, let us say, for sake of argument, sexual violence, it could that underage people couldn't watch. It would censor them, give you a mixed stream.
I've read something about that. That was good places. I think it was abroad. I think broadcasters were censoring things. I can't think of the
I can't
details.
remember what it was all about. I can just remember being in the wings in Tomorrow's World.
And Tomorrow's World was notorious for things not working, wasn't it? So
I
yeah,
remember
I must
Channel
think
4 having an X on the picture. There was some
a triangle.
It was a triangle. I remember that.
It does remind me about another way that this was all promoted. As part of the computer literacy project, they made the computer program, the computer literacy project, and what was it, the one with Ian McNaught Davis?
Yeah, the computer program.
Yeah, the computer program.
And there's a series, and one of those had telesoftware in, because I took the laptop there, sat in the studio while he pressed buttons, and it came up with a cooking menu. Real cooking, not a computer menu, but how to make soup or something. So one of the programs has got that in, and of course that was all based on the BBC Micro.
Okay, so to open things back out, because I appreciate that you've been grilled by us for a long time, and there's going to be some questions I'd anticipate as well. But just to entertain my curiosity, were there any sort of innovations that you guys were aware of that didn't make it, and you wish that they did?
The only one I came across, because it was actually shown in Hamburg at a big transport exhibition, was the traffic data service, which was going to be broadcast on the medium wave channel right at the end of the waveband. And you could localise it very much with local loops buried in the road and so on. That got a big amount of promotion at the time. What I'm thinking of, I can't remember the dates, I haven't got all my passports with the stamps in them as to when I went to Hamburg, but I would put it late 80s probably, and it was being promoted very hard by the DTI, and we had a small research department group, and I was just sent as an extra body to help provide the numbers, and that was one thing that never got off the ground. There were probably loads of others, but that was getting me about. I think it was internationally, it was the French, of course, who they had some rival system of their own, therefore, as they do. And even though I'm a Scot, and therefore there is l'entente cordiale, we didn't manage to get it to work. Sorry.
and Dave, was there any Q branch stuff from you as well?
At the time, I don't recall anything of that.
Which is Carfax, it's called. Sorry, it's called Carfax.
Carfax, thank you.
I don't recall anything standing out at the time. When you're doing these things, it's all very slow. You might have a project, and 6 months later, you're still writing software for a demo, and you're talking to a committee about it, and it doesn't.
It's a radio data system. It's like a teletext for radio.
RDS has been around, and that's different. But I mean, that's, running a service for probably, I don't know when that started, but not long after.
So you're here now. This is like the first 50 years of Teletext, as we like to say. What are both your thoughts about seeing people recovering Teletext today, and all the other things that are sort of going on with Teletext, the art scene and all that? Does it sort of like, does it surprise you in any way at all?
Yes. I think some of the ways that something very simple has been used to effectively communicate, some of the video we saw yesterday, for example, with the animation and stuff, I've never seen anything like that, even when I was active in the whole thing. And I think that shows an amount of creativity, and it's not about having clever facilities, it's about having the ability to coordinate the communication of sound, production of story, and happens to use Teletext graphics, but in a way which you think, I won't say who cares, but that it's not highly res graphics. Actually, the point benefited from using the blocky graphics, because you thought, oh, actually you've made some animation there, which I've never seen before, and that's quite interesting. I'm also extremely impressed by the enthusiasm of people, guy at the back and others, and
Jason, yeah.
looking at something which I remember, I moved on to do digital production things, so I kind of had a big gap not doing Teletext. The enthusiasm of people using that technology and being in the world I'm not anymore, but I used to be in, where you could write software to do interesting things as an individual, because now corporate software writing tends to be a bit, oh, you've got a team here and they're doing the interface and they're doing and it's all done with kind of object-based and documentation and APIs and things, whereas we can take a device with a computer, say, right, I'll write code to do something really interesting with that. And that kind of enthusiasm is really great, and it's really impressive.
Thank you. And Charles, same question to you.
Well, I think I'd echo that. I think an awful lot of modern history is getting lost because it's just swept over, and therefore a project like this to let people know how it all developed and why it all developed is very important. People are working out what the human race did 5,000 years ago, but it's also quite nice to know what they did 50 years ago.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, earlier on today we had a level 2.5 demonstration, and all the technologies reverse engineered from the proprietary equipment that existed back in the time, and we're obviously making great use of it. But I mean, I was looking at that, and that's like banging two rocks together and discovering fire, because it's sort of like we're so used to level 1 and you see this level 2. So although the technology is 50 years old, I'm sure everyone would agree. I mean, to us, it still gives us a lot of surprises. So we can only really be really grateful for the effort that, the pioneers of Teletext, it may have been only just a job to you guys, but it just causes sort of like, evenings and evenings of fascination for us. So we really want to thank you both very much for today. Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to this panel as much as I did hosting it. Please remember that sharing or telling other people about this podcast really does help. You can contact me on Facebook, the Teletext group, Blue Sky at Byte High No Limit, or the Teletext Discord, or my own Discord. And until next time, keep it blocky.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.